Hi, my name is Zoe Hill, and I'm a part of Group 9. And for our group project, we decided to look at climate change in Tonga. So some steps to get this project going, we first created a research question. This was what we wanted to know and find more about. Then we looked into the background info, which was Tonga's geography, population, and climate. Next, we looked at the impacts of climate change on the environmental aspects, the social aspects, cultural, and more. And finally, we composed all the data that we found into analysis and made a poem with using our own interpretations of everything we found. So first, our research question. What do we want to know? The research question we composed was, in recent years, how has increased climate change impacted the lives of individuals living in the Kingdom of Tonga? For example, some of these impacts include, but certainly are not limited to, impacts in the environment, infrastructure, agriculture, and society. From here, we created a thesis statement. The thesis statement we created is, climate change presents a complex set of issues to the people of Tonga, particularly impacting the environment, infrastructure, business, and society. So now I'm going to dive a little bit into the background information of Tonga. But first, I have a question for you guys. What do you currently know about Tonga? Feel free to raise your hand or shout out anything you know. Awesome. Well, I'm going to share a little bit more. So for those of you who don't know, Tonga is located in South Pacific and it's part of the Oceania Islands. It's an archipelago of around 170 islands, 36 of which are inhabited. And it covers an area of around 740 square kilometers. For their political system, they maintain a monarchy, so royal families and nobles, and they have a population of around 108,000 people. So Tonga has a tropical climate. They have a wet season from November through April and a dry season May through October. And because they're in this kind of tropical climate, they experience a lot of different types of natural disasters, such as cyclones, earthquakes, and volcanic activity. And you can see in this graph over here, just some of the temperatures and precipitation that they receive throughout the seasons. Next, I'll be talking a little bit about the impacts of climate change. And this is kind of seen through a lens of the environmental, social, and cultural aspect. So again, I have another question for you guys. Since Tonga is an independent Pacific Island nation, do you think climate change has affected them differently than other Pacific Island nations? Feel free to answer yes or no, or if you don't know, it's totally good too. So from what we found, our answer is not really. Like most impacts, like most other islands, the impacts are the same. And like other Pacific islands, the effects of climate change are becoming more and more apparent and happening faster and faster. And the monarchy system, which Tonga has, which not all Pacific Islanders use, has had little impact on the response of the effects, which is good.
Now let's look at some impacts of climate change. Climate change causes land erosion that forces homes and businesses to move further inland. We're already having to move the restaurant and bar area back. We're fighting the inevitable. It causes an increased sensitivity to natural disasters like cyclones as a result of natural barriers being washed away. This road was washed away by the rising tides. We rebuilt it, but it's going again. Tsunami surge and storm surge sit on top of sea level. You won't need such a big natural disaster to cause widespread devastation. Climate change also causes loss of land that held significant value. People used to fish from there. They used it as a base. It was a proper island not long ago. It also is a threat to the local economy and people's sources of income. The tourism sector contributes significantly to the gross domestic product of Pacific Island countries. People have to pay to go out to sea on motorboats, but with the canoe, a good breakfast gives you enough energy to paddle through the day. It also causes a sense of despair and fear for loss of culture. Many people just accept changes here. Nature changes. It's just part of life, and they don't really have much choice. Without lands, who are we? Finally, climate change has caused an emergence of female leaders and spokeswomen promoting concerns related to climate change. In the Pacific region, as in other parts of the world, women are spearheading climate adaptation and mitigation strategies. And the list goes on and on. The impacts of climate change are innumerable, but some of the major ones are the contamination of underground freshwater sources, damage to local agriculture fields, damage to or loss of significant sites and locations, increased risk for disease and other health complications, and increased breeding grounds for disease-carrying vectors. In all, climate change can easily wipe an island off the map. But even if it doesn't, it can severely damage it, and it can be a drain on local resources. For instance, if you need to rebuild a road over and over again, or it wipes out the beaches that were such a draw for tourism and the local economy. Climate change has also helped boost the revitalization of culture as a way of opposing. For instance, the traditional canoe. The traditional canoe can act as a draw for tourists. It can provide jobs, building and maintaining them, paddling them. And it can also act as a way of transportation or simply as a way of not producing carbon through a motorboat.
We start the poem with, mentioning the beautiful imagery that Tonga holds. A sun descending below the horizon, warm winds carrying scents of the ocean, distant clouds, the shine of the moonlight, all these beautiful things that really reflect the true natural beauty of Tonga. And then it's all broken up by this cry from a manaki, and it echoes out into the distance throughout the whole kingdom. And the mother consoles a manaki, or child, consoles her from the climate change, the inevitable, asking her why she's crying, realizing that she can sense the changes that are to come. Can you see the changes to our land? A manaki can see these changes. As we all know, Tonga is a low-lying island. It's not like Hawaii, which is higher up, and it is extremely susceptible to damage from the natural world. Flooding and even a single storm can sweep the whole island and create an insane amount of damage. And that is what we have to realize with climate change. It's not a damage that can be targeted into one spot. It generally can wipe over the whole island, and that's what puts Tonga in such a susceptible and vulnerable place in the Pacific. Can you taste the salt in our water? Tonga's water supply, specifically its rainwater collection, is very, very difficult to maintain. And with climate change, it becomes even more so difficult. Now, not only are these systems often flooded over with polluted water from the sea, which seeps into the systems and contaminates the water, but also we have to remember that climate change is not only an issue on land and in the ocean, it's also in the sky and in our atmosphere. Drought means less clouds, less storms in some instances, but generally the point from this is that they're getting less rain, which means that these rainwater supplies aren't filling up like they used to. And as that slowly abates them, all that they can really do when the water is not coming from the sky is ask for help. And being so isolated, it's difficult to get that water when they even do cry out. And can you hear the voices of these that deny the change? There is not a lot of aloha for Micronesians in Hawaii, and that has been a known fact for a long time. We are so ignorant here in many other parts of Oceania and the Pacific to the fact that they are really suffering a great amount of damage in their homeland, and a lot of them really have no choice but to come here to the United States, while we may not think of it, for these low-paying jobs, and to try and get a better life for themselves. And instead of welcoming them in, and giving them a hand and understanding why they're here, we laugh at them for taking our jobs and for not having the same education we have here in the United States. And despite all this hate they get here in our own backyard, you know, we have to recognize the courage these people have to leave their homeland and triumph and try and make progress into a new chapter of their lives, and to just ignore this hate that they get left and right on a day-to-day basis, and just continue to do their thing. But what we can do as a community is really try and understand and lend a hand to these people that are coming from a place that is just being devastated by climate change as a whole in every aspect of their life. Can you feel the changes? Yes, the Nadi Bay Declaration was signed, but for the people of Tonga, it's not something they're content with necessarily. There's so much more that can be done, so many more voices that can be heard, so many more communities that can be spoken upon with their own stories. And while we're just saying, climate change is going to happen and, it's inevitable, there's nothing we can do about it. We cannot be in silence and just, they cannot be in silence either. We all have to speak up and say, we're not just going to let this be our fate. We need to take action and do what we can. There's so much effort and time that can be put into, really slowing down and hopefully even, majorly altering the effects of climate change and how they devastate the kingdom and the Pacific. My dear child of Mauna Kea, this is what the commissioner from Tonga said in her speech. My dear child of Mauna Kea, and really this is a proposal to the youth of Tonga, and really to the younger generation of Oceania and the Pacific, and to anyone that wants to support, that we have to bring a voice to these people that have endured this silence. We have to realize that now in this day and age is the greatest opportunity you have to, bring your voice to light, bring your opinions to the table, and really explain what's going on in your community, and get a community built up of people that want to help, because they're out there. And the more we speak on these issues and these matters of climate change, the more we can really combat them and have efforts raised in communities and really make a bigger change. Our generation has to really speak up if we want to make the impact and really slow down the damage that climate change is doing. In our analogy at the end, the canoe drifting out from the sea and the lure being cast out, the line being cast out. We are on the line, and climate change is really just reeling us in to this fate, but we can't just let it reel us in, and we cannot just face the inevitable. We have to take action, whether that be installing seawalls in a community, creating new ways to store water and protect our water. There's so many examples of what can be done to, just mitigate the damages that climate change are doing on a day-to-day basis. We can't just be prone to this reeling in that climate change does. We have to try and, stay out on this line as long as we can, because as soon as we give in, not only are we losing communities, but we're losing a culture and we're losing a homeland. And for those that are on the outside, that might not seem important, but to the people that live there, that is their everything. It is so important that we do what we can to make sure that it is long lasting and we have to put up that fight.
All right, taking a look at the free verse poem. In the beginning, if you look up the word Amanaki, you'll see that it is a Tongan name for hope. And that was our general impression after our research. In other words, even though these individuals are suffering from all of these negative effects, and while some views are split, there is an overall sense of resilience among the people. Just like how we've discussed the interconnection between colonialism and militarism, the effects of climate change have significantly impacted all aspects of life. Now, if we go back to the beginning of the poem, we start off with the use of imagery to set the scene. I know that in Hawaii, we have some amazing sunsets. However, as seen in the image, Tonga seems to have some amazing sunsets as well. And by using this image, we aim to highlight the beauty of the land. For the next slide, we start off with the quote, "Can you see the changes to our land?" And this specifically addresses the environmental impact of climate change. As we've mentioned earlier, Tonga is sensitive to the environment, so tropical cyclones, as seen in the top image, can basically flood and wash away entire areas. The bottom image is a before and after of Tropical Cyclone Harold. As you can see, many of the trees and the structures were washed away, and these changes can seriously impact the rate of land erosion. Go to the next slide. We start with the quote, "Can you taste the salt in our water?" And this briefly mentions a specific societal impact of climate change. Since sea levels have risen, wells like the one in the bottom left image have an increased chance of becoming contaminated with salt water. In order to combat this, rainwater containers and catchment systems like the one seen in the bottom right image have been implemented. However, they too come with their own set of problems, such as maintenance and care. For example, if not properly and periodically cleaned, contaminants from debris can potentially lead to health concerns arising. Next, we move to starting off with the quote, "Can you hear the voices of those that deny these changes?" And with this, we discuss the cultural impact of climate change. Very similar to the topics we've discussed in week 11. The article, "No Aloha for Micronesians in Hawaii," perfectly describes how migrants are treated. With the topic of migration, one's sense of identity and self is brought up. And amongst the discrimination and attitudes that they must endure, their sense of dignity and pride is put to the test. Now, for the next two slides, we sort of address the political impacts of climate change. We use the quote, "Can you feel the changes?" not only to hint at the changes felt in the environment, but also in the political setting. The image shown is from a meeting discussing the Nadi Bay Declaration, which is basically a statement asking for the reduction of carbon emissions and implementation of environmental preservation. Now, while discussing topics of preservation, and when we look at those who are pushing for change, whether they are young, old, male, female, everyone is voicing their concerns and taking active steps to address them. Now, coming to the end of the poem. Now, this last part is basically a metaphorical scenario that highlights how we can't necessarily change the actions that we've already made, but we can change what we then do afterward. And after having a grasp of their situation, the quote, "We are only as strong as we are united, as weak as we are divided," by J.K. Rowling comes to mind. Seeing how everyone is working to address the issues of climate change, even though they are at the front lines, being in the Pacific and being on a low-lying island, these individuals will face the issues and they'll face it together. Now, with that being said, it brings us to the end of our presentation. So, does anyone have any questions that we can address at this time? If there are no questions, then here is our reference slide. And additionally, this is our credit slide to the Slides Go website because they provided us with this template. Other than that, thank you so much.